Insomniac Spider-Man 2 has finally been out for a little over a month now, but there was one other game I never did talk about back when it was fresh off the market, and that was a short follow-up to the 2018 Spider-Man following the adventures of Miles Morales in one of the PS5's launch titles back in late 2020. Now, I wouldn't get this until the PC version released a couple years later, thanks to my girlfriend Hannah buying this for me as a Christmas gift. Quite fitting really, seeing as how we are getting closer to the holidays this year, and this game takes place during Christmas, so I guess you could consider this a very early Christmas review. Sadly, one of the reasons I didn't get Miles Morales on the PS5 was not only because I didn't have the income for it back in the day, not that it mattered anyway because PS5s were being sold like crack in 2020, hard to come by and resold for outrageous prices. Getting a PS5 back then was an utter ball ache thanks to the COVID-19 pandemic, and scalpers were nothing but delightful about it. Nowadays though, with the epidemic calming down and most people getting their vaccinations, getting a PS5 isn't so bad, but even still, by the time I did get some income, Miles Morales was just a tad too expensive for my liking given what I had heard about the game's length and what it added since the 2018 title. And I can confirm that Miles Morales is not all that long. If you're just going through the story, you'll only get maybe 7 hours if you ignore all the side stuff, which is perhaps too short for the game's asking price. The optional content does double the length, but not everybody's gonna want to do all of that. And even today, Miles Morales still goes for a chunk of money on PS5, so unless you don't mind shelling all of that out, I suggest maybe looking into the Ultimate Edition, which also comes with a remastered version of the 2018 game for about $15 more. Again though, I got the PC version for the 2018 Spider-Man in 2022, since at that time I had recently upgraded my PC and wanted to take advantage of the new specs. But my god, in only 4 years at that point, I could not believe just how far we've already come with gaming technology. I did have to do a bit of tweaking with the graphics settings despite me having a fairly high-end PC and still keep ray tracing, but when I got it working, it was so buttery smooth compared to the 30 FPS we had in the original, and the PS5 version is pretty great too by prioritizing either 4K resolution or 60 FPS. I went and played through the whole thing again to see how it held up, and yeah, it's still a really great game. Swinging around and beating the snot out of bad guys feels just as good as it did a few years ago, and it looks fantastic to boot, but okay, we need to talk about the elephant in the room, Peter's new face. There was a massive uproar about this back when the remaster version came out on PS5, and I honestly can't say I'm the biggest fan of it either. It's very clearly trying to replicate Tom Holland's face because the MCU's still big right now and we have to make it look like the movies apparently. I had no problem with Peter's original look, and I can't understand why they decided to change it outside of pandering to the MCU crowd. Sadly, it also seems like this face is to stay if Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2 were anything to go by, so complaining about it isn't going to change anything at this point. We're just going to have to accept that this is the new look for Peter, whether we like it or not. Regardless, it doesn't stop the game from being a load of fun to play, though I did pick up a few more issues since my original video back in 2018. This game has a touch too many side activities going on, filling the map with all sorts of icons like a modern Ubisoft title. Swinging around is always going to be enjoyable, but it gets a bit mentally draining, stopping the same crimes and looking for the same stuff after a while. I said in my old review that despite the game not introducing a whole lot to the sandbox superhero genre since the Batman Arkham games, it did just enough to stand out on its own, and I still believe that to this day, but I'd be lying if I said Spider-Man 2018 didn't play things a little too safe at times, especially as the years have gone by. I also kinda wish that there were maybe a few more combos or web swinging techniques Spider-Man could pull off. Even after getting all of the upgrades, I'm left wanting slightly more fluidity to both. I mean, this is the web slinger we're talking about. He should be able to do all sorts of cool tricks, but as for this game, all we get is a small taste, which is still fine, but again, it doesn't take a great deal of time to see everything the game offers. The upgrades mostly just make these same moves and gadgets more efficient and faster to use, but Spider-Man 2 thankfully does fix these to some degree. I'm also going to go into a couple of spoilers that I couldn't discuss last time because the game was still new, but skip to this point in the video if you want to save the surprises. I'll give you a few seconds. I think the use of the Sinister Six during the last third was kinda premature. It is great to see all of these iconic villains together, but I think they should have gotten more time individually before we started banding them together at the last minute. Save it for another sequel or something, but unfortunately it doesn't take too long to stop the Sinister Six and put them back in jail. It's the only bit of fan service that I don't think quite works to its full potential, outside of Dr. Octavius becoming Doc Ock. That at least had some build up to it, as you saw Octavius slowly losing his mind until he eventually snaps and puts those mechanical arms to use. And we had the relationship between him and Peter on top of that to really feel for them both. Just a bit of history with every one of the villains could go a long way. They don't necessarily have to be BFFs with Peter, but some sort of backstory would have been ideal. The last thing I want to talk about in regards to revisiting Spider-Man 2018 is the DLC, which I didn't get to cover a whole lot since not all of it was released yet, only the first part. I found the opening chapter to be quite interesting, especially when it came to Peter's interactions with Felicia Hardy, aka Black Cat. Poor Peter just keeps getting played like a damn fiddle in this DLC, and yet, still probably a less toxic relationship than with MJ. Yeah, I still don't like her in this game. She's a lot better in the second one, but as for here, she is way too aggressive with Peter at points when he clearly does not deserve it. Anyway, things do go sadly a bit downhill from the second part onwards, with Yuri Watanabe now suddenly wanting to kill Hammerhead in cold blood for murdering her men, even though I'm sure there were tons of other cops that died in the main campaign and she didn't care. But I guess this was one step too far, and now she's going to be a possible future villain for Spider-Man. Then Hammerhead gets put in this ridiculous cybernetic suit that he calls Project Olympus to gain more power. All the while, Silver Sable is once again refusing to listen to Spider-Man, and Screwball still bleeds our eardrums with those godforsaken challenges where she doesn't shut the fuck up.
Oh, can't wait to see what thrilling action Spidey...
No, this doesn't work. Then there's the chain gun wielding and robot armor goons who are so freaking relentless. I was playing on the spectacular difficulty this time, which is the equivalent of hard mode, but even on normal, these guys do so much damage in a short time. They're probably the toughest combat sequences in the game. I mean, Jesus, enough. These last two parts overall range from okay to a bit of a mess. Hammerhead's never really been one of Spider-Man's most intriguing villains, but they already used most of the better ones during the core game, and using any others on DLC would seem like a waste, so I guess he's all we have. The optional stuff, DLC or not, can be a little dull and repetitive after a while, aside from the few standout ones, and it only marginally adds to the main story, which you still might need to end up playing anyway to get the full context for future sequels. It's definitely not awful DLC, please don't misunderstand me on that, it just has a few frustrating quirks about it, and the main campaign is still a great time as a whole and one of the best superhero games out there.
Wait, wasn't I supposed to be talking about something else as well? Oh yeah, Miles Morales, I completely forgot about that. God, I went on a bit of a tangent there.
So I'm not overly familiar with Miles Morales outside of the fact that he's one of the more popular alternate takes on your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, in that he was the first African-American webhead living in New York with his Puerto Rican mom Rio Morales, who I gotta say was an absolute sweetheart in the 2020 game. Loved seeing her react with Miles and dealing with the hardships of losing a beloved family member, on top of Miles occasionally speaking to her in Spanish, which was just a great way to tug at the heartstrings. Anyway, the comic starring Miles once again involved him getting bitten by a radioactive spider, and where Peter had Uncle Ben telling him with great power comes great responsibility, Miles would ask himself what would Peter Parker do to motivate him further. He really looked up to Peter and would eventually cross paths and bond with the original Spider-Man. I don't tend to read a whole lot of comics in my spare time, and unfortunately my only exposure to Miles Morales outside of the game are the Spider-Verse movies which focus on him. Hell, with Peter Parker, my main sources were the Sam Raimi movies and the old 90s cartoon I would catch on TV. I did have an anthology of comics as a kid with this cover on it, but I can't remember what it was called or if I even still have it anywhere. The Spider-Verse films are pretty great though. I don't think I'd consider them masterpieces of cinema like most people do, but I can't deny that they're entertaining to watch just for the visuals alone. This is such a great art and animation style. Without them, I dare say these movies wouldn't be nearly as good. I at least gained a bit of knowledge about Miles Morales and his lifestyle thanks to Spider-Verse and this PS5 game, though I don't actually own the PS5 version myself. Instead, I'll use my PC version, which runs fairly well with my specs after adjusting my settings like with the 2018 Spider-Man. But holy hell, did I come across more glitches than I did with the first game, and they weirdly mostly appeared during the last third. The game crashed on me during the second Rhino battle, mission progression would get stuck once or twice and I would need to restart. There's supposed to be a cat for this costume I've got on, but it's literally out of the bag. Half of Wilson Fisk's body just friggin' disappeared during his brief cameo, and the ending had Miles do his best Marty McFly impression where parts of his body vanished too. It completely ruined the final shot where he was alongside Peter Parker. I'm guessing these glitches only show up on the PC version, however. I've watched my brother Jew go through the PS5 version and didn't experience nearly as many hiccups. Hopefully some patches will fix these issues, but oof, that is unfortunate. Hilarious, but unfortunate. It wasn't enough to ruin the experience anyway, but let's very quickly talk about what actually happened story-wise before discussing gameplay. Just a forewarning though, Miles Morales does assume that you play the 2018 Spider-Man up until the end, and as such, I'm going to be mentioning some spoilers, and that goes for this game too. So here's the time code, you know what to do, I'll see you in a bit. So like I said, Miles Morales continues from the events of the last game, where Miles realizes he has spider powers and shows them to Peter, leading Peter to reveal that he's Spider-Man. 1 year later, Miles is now being taught by Peter on how best to use his web powers and fighting techniques, almost like an older brother teaching their ways to a younger brother, and Miles greatly looks up to Peter, making for a pretty good relationship between the two. However, Peter has to go away for a few weeks and help Mary Jane with a photography job in Symkaria, leaving Miles in charge of protecting New York on his own. Little does Miles realize though that his first few weeks flying solo are going to be utter hell for him physically and emotionally. For starters, Rio invites his friend Finn around for Christmas dinner after they had not spoken in months, but we'll come back to her in a minute, I assure you. Meanwhile, there's this asshole with a big shit-eating grin named Simon Krieger and his company Roxxon, who are developing a safe, new, and reusable energy source called Nuform that, of course being based on a comic book, is not safe in the slightest and could corrupt at any moment, which Roxxon are perfectly aware of. This catches the attention of the Underground, a group of rebels who see Roxxon for who they really are and want to stop them in Nuform, but through dangerous methods that will harm innocent lives in the process. So Miles needs to not only take care of Roxxon, but the Underground as well. It only gets worse and personal for him though when it turns out Finn is leading the Underground as the Tinkerer. She and her brother had previously tried putting an end to Krieger's plans, but Krieger saw right through them and planned a trap that Finn managed to escape out of, but her brother didn't and got killed as a result, with Finn now wanting full revenge no matter how many people need to be put at risk. Miles isn't entirely alone in stopping Finn, however. He's got his best friend Genki to act as the guy in the chair, his uncle Aaron, who's secretly another vigilante known as the Prowler, acting as a double agent for Roxxon, and even Rio eventually finds out that Miles is the new Spider-Man and becomes very supportive of him even in the middle of her election campaign against Norman Osborn. She really is Mom of the Year in this game, gotta tell ya. Just ignore the fact that she's okay letting her teenage son putting himself in danger to save New York. You might have pieced together, however, that this plot has a lot of similar beats to the first game, just some slight differences. Instead of Sable's units, we have Roxxon. Instead of Devil's Breath, there's Nuform. And Finn replaces Dr. Octavius as the trusted ally who has their own agenda and won't let Spider-Man stop what they're doing. It's mostly the character interactions that make this feel like an all-new experience compared to the last game. Miles is still fresh to the Spider-Man business, so he's trying to figure out how to balance his normal life with his crime-fighting duties, as well as who he can trust with his secret and help out in any way he can as both Miles and Spider-Man. The best moment is no doubt when Miles has conversations with his deaf girl Haley using sign language and the two clearly have some sort of chemistry. It's super sweet to see, and I was so happy to see that she came back in Spider-Man 2 after recording footage for that game. You can tell that Miles Morales came out during 2020 as well, with all the promotion of the Black Lives Matter movement and the slightly on the nose social commentary at certain points in the game, but it does all work to its favor. My own spider sense lets me see some of you just rolling your eyes at the thought of these serious topics being in a Spider-Man game though, but it is important to be aware of, especially with Miles' race and background. Messages like this need to be heard and we shouldn't ignore it. Uncomfortable politics aside, how's the gameplay compared to the 2018 Spider-Man? Well, let's just say the shorter length wasn't the only reason I didn't pick up Miles Morales straight away, because you'll notice some similarities between both titles. For lack of a better word, it's a glorified expansion. To an extent anyway, it's a lot like playing Uncharted: The Lost Legacy after Uncharted 4. There's very few additions that do an okay enough job at standing out from its older sibling, but it is ultimately still the same experience as before. Miles has basically all of Peter's combat and web swinging abilities that once again gradually expands through a skill tree system that isn't quite as large as last time, but equally as important to pummel bad guys for XP, level up, and spend one of your acquired skill points. However, a few abilities can now only be earned by tackling Peter's VR challenges that he set up for Miles' training. It's no different to the Taskmaster and Screwball side missions though. You just need to defeat enemies and clear obstacles through certain conditions where you can try and earn more rewards by doing them in a fast enough time or reaching a high score. It's also where Peter gets some absolutely laugh out loud moments at times, between pretending to be a hostage, imitating a battle that happened between him and Vulture, and the numerous pigeon facts with puns that are more clever than they really ought to be.
Pigeon fact 2, a smidgen more pigeon.
He's really into pigeons.
The comedy in the last game was passable enough, none of it made me roll on the floor howling per se, but some of Peter's lines here really made me miss the dude on occasions, although I am glad he was mostly sidelined for these moments. It's supposed to be the Miles Morales show, not the Peter Parker show with special guest Miles Morales. Our titular hero unfortunately didn't make me laugh a single time, however, and even Miles mentions that Peter flunked him on quipping one time, so it seems like it's not just brawling and swinging he needs to work on. Well, for now, he can pay attention to his new Venom attacks. No, not yet. These are electric-based attacks that Miles can spend his focus on. That little meter from the first game which would heal you or let you do a special takedown that you can still choose to do instead in Miles Morales should you wish. Miles only has about half the gadgets that Peter had, and not all of them are especially useful, honestly, but the Venom abilities more than make up for it. For story reasons, it allows Miles to have a surplus of power and use them for stuff like breaking walls and getting generators up and running again, but for gameplay purposes, there's a bit more to it. To start with, you get the Venom Punch that delivers, well, a bigger punch to enemies that can affect other enemies next to the one you're hitting. Get surrounded by foes, and you can maybe try using the Venom Jump followed by the Venom Slam. Then finally, you'll get the Venom Dash later on to blaze through in a straight line and push away any goons that cross your path. The Venom powers aren't much of an addition, but it does a pretty decent job at standing out from the last game. It's pretty satisfying to blow away several goons at once with these abilities, and we'll be seeing a little more of it in the next game. The only thing I would have changed is the recharge rate for the Venom Jump, because I really think this could have made traversing through New York even greater by executing a high jump, but it takes a bit too much time to activate again, so wishful thinking, I suppose. No doubt Miles' most broken tool, however, is the stealth camouflage, which you can't use forever, and attacking enemies drains it extremely fast, but the amount of time you do have is more than enough to get away from enemies if things get too overwhelming for you, where you can then stealthily take them down without any more scratches on you. Hey, I'm not complaining, anything to make the bases less irritating. But if I want a break from the madness, I can check the new phone app Genki created that keeps track of objectives more easily than in the first game. And with some of these objectives come a new batch of enemies, primarily from the underground and a bit of Roxxon. You've got your pretty standard goons to begin with, and refamiliarize yourself if it's been a while since you played the original, but as the game goes on, the enemies get stronger and have different attacks. Miles Morales can be fairly challenging, and I did brave the spectacular difficulty again, but I imagine even on normal, some of these encounters would be pretty damn tough. The dudes with the sword whip things ripped right out of Soul Calibur can be really damn annoying because they can grab you from far away, even in the air, but the hammer guys are the worst. They never stop swinging them around, and they hurt so much. I'm surprised Miles doesn't have his lower jaw missing afterwards. This game is probably not the most friendly to newcomers. Despite the tutorials it provides during the opening, it still kinda assumes you played its predecessor, or at least have an idea on how it handles, and that pretty much goes into the whole deja vu feeling about Miles Morales altogether. Don't get me wrong, the game is still plenty of fun. In fact, I'd say it's even more approachable than the first one due to the smaller nature of it all. Side quests and collectibles aren't as frequent as they were before, and the story's more compact, but playing it right after the 2018 Spider-Man might not be the best idea if you don't want burnout. The side quests in particular are probably not the most interesting. The bases return for starters, where you're once again defeating waves and waves of enemies and the combat gets the most intense. I didn't really like these in the last game, and I'm sad to see they've come back. But I think I found the soundbite quest to be even worse. There was nothing all that fun about these, you're just searching for very specific sounds across the city that form a song for your uncle. It's not exactly what I had in mind for a Spider-Man game of all things, and it can be so damn picky where the right spot is, though I'm glad it's at least optional. I'm also not crazy about how some of Miles' abilities can only be unlocked via New Game Plus, which is a shame because they can be stupidly powerful once you get them, but I personally rarely play anything on New Game Plus since I don't want to be so OP that it's not fun to beat up crooks anymore, so I guess I won't be using these skills too often. All that aside, the game is still quite enjoyable, and there's not a whole lot else to discuss that we already didn't cover in my review of the 2018 Spider-Man. It still looks great graphically, the smoother frame rate on both PC and PS5 makes the experience even better, and the variety of costumes once again is some cool fan service for hardcore Spider-Man enthusiasts. I especially love the Spider-Verse outfit that actually includes the choppy frame rate animation style and it doesn't feel out of place at all. This is so great. Musically speaking, it's alright, but I couldn't tell you any standout tracks, honestly. A lot of it's just atmosphere, except for the credits theme I'm Ready by Jaden Smith. That's actually pretty damn catchy, I have to admit. I mean, say what you will about the man himself, but this song is gonna be stuck in my head for a while. Combat may not be a whole lot different to the last game, but it's just as satisfying, and the new Venom powers help add slightly more variety, and web swinging is still as exhilarating as before, though as we'll see in the next game, that's going to be even better than this.
And that'll lead me to Spider-Man 2 for the following video, but I can still recommend Miles Morales as a decent appetizer before the main course, or if you didn't really like how expansive the 2018 game was and want something a little more miniature by comparison. Nothing wrong with that at all, however. Sometimes Spider-Man games just work as more concise adventures than these big open playgrounds with tons of crime going on. But the latter is what we'll be seeing for the next game. Surprisingly, it took me less time to finish than I thought it would. Will I ever get to Tears of the Kingdom? God only knows, but I hope you all enjoyed this video anyway, and I'll see you for Spider-Man 2. Take care, everybody. Following the adventures of Miles Morales, in one of the PS5's late... I can't seem to do this. I guess you could consider this a very early Christmas review. Holla friggin' Luya, I gotta take, and that only took... How long did it take? I have no idea, but it took a long time. How's the gameplay compared to the 2018 Spider-Man? Well... I forgot my line, so I couldn't tell you.